Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm John Townsend, and today we have a very unique recipe. This one is called rice bread. Thanks for joining us today. So the recipe today is from the recipe book of Harriet Pinckney Horry. She started her recipe book in 1770, and she continued to add to it through the late 18th century and the very early 19th century. This is a very uniquely North American recipe because it's an adaptation of a cornbread recipe. So if you take one of the traditional cornbread recipes of the 18th century and you change it into rice, this is what you get. This is a rice recipe, and it starts off very simply. Let's get a little bit of rice flour cooking right now. So we're going to start off with getting a little bit of water boiling here. I probably got, 2 cups or so of hot water going, and then we're going to start boiling that. And this recipe, the main ingredient here is rice flour. And that's pretty interesting. We don't see rice flour showing up in a lot of these recipes. She actually calls for rice to be pounded up and sifted, which is very similar to what they would have done with corn and cornmeal. Many times, instead of grinding corn at a corn mill, they would pound it up and sift it. So we've got pounded up and sifted, or in this case, just plain rice flour from the store. We're going to let our water get hot. We're going to take a quarter of our full batch of rice flour. So the whole recipe will use 1 pound. We're using a quarter pound of rice flour, and we're going to slowly introduce it here into this hot water and get it all boiling and make it into a sticky, sort of a hasty pudding of the time period. I'm just going to add this a little bit at a time because I don't want it to clump up and cause a lot of trouble. So we're just going to keep adding this until this gets to a nice thick, let's say a gelatinous goo. I'm not sure how to explain this so well, but we're just going to keep cooking this up. And it goes really quickly. As soon as we get to a certain critical mass, this will thicken right up and get a lot like a really thick oatmeal. Okay, it looks plenty thick. I'm gonna go ahead and get this off the fire, and we need to let it cool. So our rice mixture has cooled off. We need to bring this down to at least blood temperature. So let's say 100 degrees, 105 degrees. You can just stick your finger in there. If it feels hot at all, it's still too hot. But you don't want it to be cold necessarily. We're gonna put this into a mixing bowl. Yours might be a little thicker than this. This is just slightly runnier than I usually do it. Now we need to mix yeast into this because this is a yeast risen bread. I've got some yeast back here, some barm actually, some ale barm. I recently was brewing a batch of ale, and so I've got some of this barm left over here, and I've made sure it's kind of active and going. You'll probably be using a regular bread yeast that you get at the store. You'll probably get one of those little packets, right? So put it into, let's say, a cup of very slightly warm water. Let that kind of percolate for 10 or 15 minutes, dissolve and do all its thing and start getting active. But since I've got this barm, I'm going to go ahead and put it in here. Again, about a cup's worth. We're going to get this mixed in to our current lump here. Okay, now that we've got that mixed in, I'm going to go ahead and start adding this other rice flour back into the mix. So remember, we started off with a pound complete, and now we're adding, first we used a quarter of a pound to make that first boiled mixture. And now we're taking the rest, this 3/4 of a pound, and adding it in. I'm going to go ahead and at this point too add in a little bit of salt. This is going to inhibit the yeast a little bit, but it kind of needs a little salt. The salt isn't necessarily in the recipe, and of course we could add this, add whatever that is to the topping. This bread is meant to be kind of plain. It's a filler for other parts of the meal. So here's our mixture. I've got all that flour incorporated into that, and this is This is probably a little, I mean, I've done several batches of this. This is a little softer than what I've done before, but I still think it's gonna turn out just fine. So what we're gonna do now is prepare a bowl that we're gonna bake this in. Now you could bake this in a pie plate, so that's kind of thin. It might be a little easier to get this baked up properly in that, but I've got here these tin bowls. They make a really nice loaf pan. And so let me get this buttered up and then we'll put our dough right into this. So we do want to give this a little bit of room to grow, so I left just a little bit. Let me smooth this out on top because we want to let this rise now. And to get it to rise, we're going to let it be in a warmer spot. And to know when it's done rising, instead of like regular bread that's gonna, raise up like 2 times or whatever and get huge, this is just gonna raise a little bit. And the key, just like on cornbreads, the key to this is to look for a little bit of cracking. When we see that ball open up a little bit and start to crack, we know, okay, it's risen enough, it's time it can go in the oven. So I'm gonna set this aside in a nice warm place and watch for the cracking. It might take 45 minutes, it might take 2 hours, depends all on the temperature and on your yeast and all that good stuff. So let me set this aside. We can see the cracking has appeared on the outside of this loaf. Depending on how soft it is or hard it is, you'll see more or less of that cracking. It's time for it to go into the oven, and I would say this is best to bake at, say, 400 degrees for, I don't know, it really depends, 25, 35 minutes, depends on the temperature of your oven. I'm cooking this in the earthen oven, so it's gonna be a little bit hotter, probably about 450 when I start to bake this. Well, our finished product, our rice bread, and you can see here we've got some decent structure out of something that has, even though it's called, gelatinous or gooey or whatever, it doesn't have any gluten in it. So this actually has a pretty normal kind of structure compared to something like a cornbread that's made in exactly the same manner. And again, this is a seemingly exact adaptation of a period cornbread to rice. So I'm gonna try this just like it is first. And really, there's not much here. There's rice, there's water, there's a little bit of barm, there's a little bit of salt. That's it. It's as simple as can be. And it tastes like what you would expect it, very plain. This is the filling part of the meal. Well, we can add a little bit of butter to this. I think that's an obvious thing we could do. We could probably put all kinds of different items on top of this as an additional flavor. We could heat this up. We could cut it in slices like this and fry it in the morning. I bet that would be really good. Such a unique recipe, using rice as a substitution for cornmeal to make this cornbread type product out of rice. Very popular here. This cookbook was from South Carolina, where rice was very, very popular. So you can see this is really, it is a unique one. There is one other rice bread recipe in that same cookbook, but this one was so quick, so simple. I loved it, and right out of the 18th century. If you're interested in this recipe book, you can find it. I'll put a link, an Amazon affiliate link, down in the description section if you're interested in checking out this book. A lot of very interesting recipes, and we know these were all used in North Carolina, or in South Carolina here in this 18th century and early 19th century context. So if you're interested, make sure to check that out. I want to thank everyone for coming along and trying these things out. As we experiment, we don't really know how some of these things are going to turn out. It's not a common dish to us today, or to at least where we're at. So I always love experimenting with these and finding out these new things that we have lost or put away in history, but now we can bring them back and try them again. A wonderful dish. I want to thank everyone out there for coming along as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century.